It's the experience that, I mean, it almost defines a generation right now. You followed the blueprint.
You did everything right.
Everything. You got the education, you landed the full-time job, maybe you're even working 2 jobs. You work hard, you pay your rent, you've avoided all the obvious mistakes.
And yet,
every single month, that paycheck hits your account, and it feels like it's just gone before the weekend even starts.
and that feeling, that deep, constant, low-grade stress, that's really what we're diving into today, because it feels so incredibly personal.
Oh, completely. It feels like a failure.
Like a failure of willpower, or maybe you're just bad at budgeting. But when you step back and, look at the sources, you realize this isn't you. It's a profound structural pattern. That financial treadmill you feel like you're on.
Yeah.
It's been engineered.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Yeah.
That engineering. Because for the listener who is doing everything right, the one checking all the boxes,
Yeah.
why does it feel like they're constantly living just one unexpected expense away from a real crisis? A car repair? A surprise medical bill? That's all it takes to just, I don't know, throw everything into chaos. And this is with a quote-unquote good job.
It's because the cost of admission to what we culturally see as like middle-class stability, it's just completely outpaced income growth for almost everyone.
Or goalposts have shifted.
Dramatically. We were all sort of promised that if you work hard, you get stability. But the goalposts have moved so far that even a solid median wage can't keep up with the new baseline of just fixed costs.
Can you give us the hard numbers on that? Because I think people, they feel it, they know prices are high, but I don't think they grasp the actual scale of the change compared to, say, 30 or 40 years ago.
The changes, well, it's staggering. We talk about median wages being basically flat for decades, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so hold that thought. Now look at the core fixed expenses. Let's just start with housing. Housing is the biggest piece of the puzzle, the biggest determinant of stability.
And the expectation of what a house even is today is so much larger.
It is. The sources cite this, that the median size of a new American home, it increased by 50%. 50!
While income stayed flat.
During the exact same period where that median income was, largely stagnant. So this isn't just inflation, it's a kind of cultural creep. We're expected to build and finance these massive structures now.
I remember reading that one data point that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
The average new American home now has more bathrooms than occupants.
Exactly. It sounds funny, but it points to this fundamental pressure. You're buying or renting a bigger, more complex, and way more expensive lifestyle unit just to be considered normal today.
So you're trying to buy your parents comfort, but at 1.5 times the size, with none of the income growth to back it up.
And your margin of safety is just gone, wiped out from day one.
And when the income doesn't cover that new required spending, you bridge the gap with debt. It's really the only option on the table.
It becomes the necessary scaffolding. Just look at the household debt-to-income ratio. Back in, say, the early 1970s, it was around 60%. The sources show that by 2007, just before the crash, it had soared to over 130%.
Wait, so the amount of debt people carry relative to their income, it more than doubled.
It doubled. The average American is relying on twice as much financial scaffolding, credit cards, mortgages, car loans, just to hold on to a standard of living that previous generations got with way less leverage.
And it's not just the big house.
No, it's not.
It's everything you need to function, right?
Yeah.
The car to get to the job to pay for the house.
Absolutely. Transportation is another huge drain on the paycheck. The average car loan, adjusted for inflation, nearly tripled between 1975 and 2003. We're talking like $12,000 up to almost $28,000.
Wow.
So when every major fixed cost, your house, your car, your education, is doubling or tripling, of course the paycheck disappears. The margin for error is zero.
Okay, so if the structural reality is that this new baseline for a stable life is just unaffordable for most people, why does the anxiety we feel turn into self-loathing? Why do we look at our bank account and think, I'm failing, not the system is misaligned?
Because we are fundamentally wired to trust our own lived experience more than we trust a spreadsheet. And this gets us to the core psychology of money. The sources frame it with this beautiful idea, no one is crazy.
That's a powerful thing to hear, especially when you feel like you're going crazy for struggling when you're working so hard.
It's a profound mechanism. Think about your own unique personal history with money, how your parents talked about it, your first job, your first big loss.
Sure.
That whole personal history, it accounts for, I don't know, a tiny fraction of a percent of everything that's ever happened in the global financial world. maybe 0.000000001%.
A tiny speck of data.
A tiny speck. But that tiny speck accounts for maybe 80% of how you personally think the world works when it comes to money?
So my whole framework for what's normal, what's safe, it's built on this incredibly narrow personal slice of history.
Precisely. So if you grew up in the post-World War II era, which so many of our cultural ideas did, you saw a time where stability and class equalization were, actual economic norms. You assumed if you got a degree and a good job, you'd get a certain predictable life. Your whole mental model is anchored to that.
And now if I'm operating with that inherited expectation, and I find myself financially fragile, my brain doesn't immediately go to, oh, the structural dynamics of capital have shifted since 1985.
No.
It goes to, I must have missed something. I'm doing something wrong. It's my fault.
Exactly. And someone who watched their family lose everything in 2008 thinks about risk completely differently than someone who just quietly put money in an S&P 500 fund since the 90s. They're both smart, but their histories make their choices look crazy to each other.
And they make perfect sense to them.
Perfect sense. And today's generation of earners is often wrestling with these ghosts, the expectations of stability from their parents' playbook, a playbook that is now totally obsolete.
And that pressure to live up to an obsolete playbook, that's what drives what the source material calls the big stretch. This is where the self-blame meets social comparison.
That stretch happens because we're social creatures. And in America, this idea of lifestyle parity has been a really powerful cultural glue.
Right.
So the sources use this example of Peter. He's a bank branch manager, makes $80,000 a year. By median standards, he's doing fine.
Oh.
But he's constantly seeing Joe, the investment banker, who might be making $900,000 a year.
Peter isn't consciously comparing his salary number to Joe's $900,000, but he's comparing his lifestyle.
He's comparing the consumption. Historically, the gap between an $80,000 professional and a $900,000 professional wasn't this massive chasm.
Right.
So Peter sees Joe's visible spending, and he feels this subconscious sense of entitlement to a cellular life. A nice house, good schools for the kids, new cars. The system told him he should have these things if he works hard.
Which leads to the stretch. He pushes his own finances right to the edge to try and match that visible expectation.
He attempts the big stretch, and he leverages himself to the breaking point. The sources detail it. Huge mortgages, $45,000 in credit card debt, heavy student loans.
It looks totally irresponsible on paper.
Totally. But he's doing it to fulfill this inherited cultural mandate to keep up with the visible standard of life that he sees all around him.
And this just highlights a painful truth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We aren't comparing ourselves to the invisible, struggling median family. We're benchmarking against the visible success stories, the top 5%, and then we judge ourselves as failures when we can't afford their habits.
And that brings us to the hidden game that almost everyone gets wrong. It's the confusion between being rich and being wealthy. And this distinction it's just critical to understanding that pressure Peter feels.
Okay, let's define those terms because they sound similar. What's the fundamental difference?
Richness is easy to see. It is the material evidence of current income. It's the expensive car, the huge house, the designer clothes. It is visible spending.
Okay.
Wealth, on the other hand, is hidden. Wealth is the income you don't spend. It's the savings you never touch, the invested capital, the lack of debt. It's the time and the options you have available. You can't see wealth because it hasn't been spent yet.
So when you're looking at your neighbor, you're observing their richness and using it as a benchmark for your own life. But you're failing to realize you're trying to match spending that might be supported by hidden wealth, or, just as likely, by crippling hidden debt.
It's what the source calls the you and me fallacy. We take our financial cues from people who are playing a fundamentally different game than we are.
A different game.
Completely. We see their spending, we assume that's the reward for success, and we try to replicate the reward without having the capital base or the time horizon to support it.
And we completely miss the psychological trap that spending creates. It's the man in the car paradox.
This concept is so crucial for anyone doing the big stretch. The person who buys the fancy car, the rich person, they often do it because they want admiration. They want you to look at them and think, wow, they're so successful.
But the paradox is that the person on the sidewalk, the one looking at the car, they don't think about the driver at all.
No. The sources emphasize this. The viewer, you, the listener, You only think about the object. You think, wow, what a beautiful car. If I owned that car, people would think I was cool. You're admiring the thing, not the person.
So the very spending that was meant to generate admiration, just, it backfires. It generates envy, which then drives the viewer to want to acquire that same object themselves to get their own dose of admiration. It's a never-ending self-defeating loop.
Precisely. You realize the tools used to project success, the visible richness, they become the benchmarks for other people's inadequacy, which drives them toward their own big stretch.
So you're constantly judging your own life as a failure because your benchmark is set by the visible spending of an entirely separate financial class, a spending that might not even be supported by any real wealth at all.
And that's why the frustration never ends, even for high earners. You might earn $150,000, but if you live in a neighborhood where everyone makes $500,000, you still feel poor.
Because your definition of success is being warped by the visible cues around you.
Right. You feel like you're failing because you didn't even realize the competition you entered was just matching the consumption patterns of people whose risk tolerance and capital and history you know nothing about.
And that's the tragedy, isn't it? Mistaking money for physics. We desperately want it to be predictable. Clean rules, spreadsheets, logic.
Yes.
But the anxiety, the struggle we're talking about today, it's money governed by psychology, by emotion, by history, and by comparison. So the central realization of this whole deep dive is this crushing weight of always feeling behind is often the price you pay for holding on to these outdated cultural expectations. The belief that if you just work hard, your lifestyle should look like your successful neighbors.
When the reality is that we're living in a system where those massive wage and wealth gains have really only gone to a very small slice of the population since the 1980s.
And that gap between the story we were told and the system we actually live in, that's where all this anxiety lives.
It's not a critique of your effort
Yeah.
or your intelligence. It's just,
Yep.
it's a consequence of that collision between story and reality.
And that brings us to a quiet and maybe a difficult place to end. We're not offering advice here. It's more of a realization. Once you see this pattern, that the struggle might not be you, but a warped benchmark from these huge historical shifts, it is genuinely impossible to unsee it.
You can't unsee the gap between the expectation and the reality. And that's the true challenge, isn't it? What happens when the fundamental story you inherited about how the world should work just fundamentally conflicts with the world that actually exists today?
Right.
The immediate struggle shifts from how do I earn more to the far more agonizing question of what does enough actually look like for me, independent of the game everyone else seems to be playing. And that,
Right.
well, that's the real starting point for untangling the big stretch.